The hillside mansion sat perched above San Francisco like a wounded bird that had forgotten how to fly. Glass and steel and imported stone from quarries in Vermont, all of it assembled with the precision of a Swiss timepiece and the warmth of a surgeon's scalpel. The morning fog rolled in from the bay, wrapping itself around the structure as if trying to smother it, and somewhere inside those walls the sound of motorized wheels rolled across marble floors in a rhythm that had become as regular as a heartbeat and twice as lonely. Victoria Hartwell had not chosen this silence. It had chosen her settling into the bones of her home the way arthritis settles into aging joints, gradual and then all at once, until one morning you wake up and realize that the quiet has become a physical presence, a fourth wall that closes in a little more each day. She sat in her wheelchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city below come alive with the unconscious energy of people who could walk to their cars, climb stairs without thinking, run to catch a bus if they were late. 2 years ago, she had been one of them. 2 years ago, she had been climbing the sheer granite faces of Yosemite, her muscles burning with the good kind of pain, the kind that meant you were alive and pushing against your limits. Now the only thing she pushed against was the joystick on her chair, and even that small motion felt like surrender. The intercom buzzed and Angela Torres's voice came through with the weariness of someone who had delivered the same message too many times. The new assistant had arrived. Victoria did not turn from the window. She already knew how this would end, the same way it had ended 23 times before. They would come in with their forced smiles and their practiced patience, and within days, sometimes hours, that patience would crack like thin ice over a frozen lake. She had become an expert at finding the cracks at pressing until they gave way, at watching people fall through into the cold water of their own limitations. It was not cruelty, she told herself. It was efficiency. Better to know now who would stay and who would run than to invest in hope only to watch it walk out the door with another resignation letter. Angela appeared in the doorway, her face arranged in the careful neutrality she had perfected over 2 decades of service to the Hartwell family. Behind her stood a man Victoria had not yet bothered to look at, though she could feel his presence the way you feel a change in barometric pressure before a storm. The housekeeper's introduction was brief and professional, the words landing in the room like stones dropped into still water. Nathan Brooks, 33 years old, extensive experience in home health care, excellent references. The agency had been particularly enthusiastic about this one. Angela noted, though her tone suggested she had stopped believing in enthusiasm somewhere around assistant number 15. Victoria finally turned her chair, the motor humming softly as she pivoted, to face the man who thought he could succeed where so many others had failed. Her first impression was of someone who had been worn down by life, but not defeated by it. His jacket had seen better days. The leather cracked at the elbows and faded at the shoulders, but it was clean and carefully maintained. His shoes needed resoling. His eyes, though, those were what caught her attention. They held a steadiness that she had not seen in any of his predecessors, a calm that did not waver when she fixed him with the stare that had sent assistant number 19 running for the door before lunch on his first day. She let the silence stretch a test in itself. Most people rushed to fill empty space with words, nervous chatter that revealed their insecurities like cards laid face up on a table. This one simply waited, his hands loose at his sides, his breathing even. Interesting. Her voice came out sharper than as she intended, though she made no effort to soften it. She told him he would quit in 3 days, just like all the others. It was not a prediction, but a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who had run this experiment enough times to know the outcome. His response surprised her. A slight smile barely visible at the corners of his mouth, and words that carried no defensiveness and no false bravado. He would see about that, nothing more. No promises, no protestations, no attempts to convince her of his dedication. Just that quiet confidence that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere optimism. Angela excused herself with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned when to disappear, and Victoria found herself alone with this stranger who refused to flinch. She began cataloging his weaknesses, searching for the cracks she would eventually exploit. Everyone had them, everyone broke. She told him about herself with the bluntness of someone who had stopped caring about first impressions. The agency would have mentioned that she was difficult. Difficult, she repeated, was being generous. She was a nightmare. She threw things. She made demands that bordered on impossible, and sometimes crossed that border entirely. She had fired people for infractions so minor that they barely registered as infractions at all. He absorbed this information without visible reaction, as if she were reading him a weather report. His response was practical rather than emotional. If she did not breathe wrong, he supposed he would be fine. The words contained the ghost of humor, but his face remained neutral, waiting. Her eyes narrowed. He thought he was funny. The question was a challenge, an invitation to stumble. He did not take the bait. No, he did not think he was funny. He thought he was here to do a job. He asked her to tell him what she needed. For a moment, something flickered across Victoria's face, a flash of uncertainty that she quickly buried beneath her practiced mask of cold indifference. People did not respond to her this way. They apologized, they reassured, they tried to prove themselves. They did not simply cut through her defenses and ask practical questions. Fine. She recovered quickly, her voice hardening again as she issued her first command. She needed her medication. The bottles were in the bathroom attached to her bedroom. She wanted the blood pressure pills and the pain medication, and she wanted them now. He moved without hesitation, his footsteps confident as he navigated the unfamiliar space. Victoria listened to him opening cabinets, the soft clink of prescription bottles being moved and examined. He was gone for perhaps 90 seconds, long enough for her to wonder if he had gotten lost or overwhelmed by the pharmacy's worth of medications that lined her bathroom shelves. Then he returned, 2 bottles held out toward her, his expression unchanged. She stared at his outstretched right hand, letting another silence build. Then she struck. Wrong hand. He should have known to offer them to her left hand. She always took pills with her left hand. A detail he could not possibly have known, a rule she had just invented, a trap designed to fail. His response was immediate and unremarkable. He simply switched hands, extending the bottles toward her left side without comment, without frustration, without the flash of irritation that would have given her something to work with. She knocked the bottles to the floor. The plastic clattered against the marble pills, rattling inside their containers, and she watched his face for the cracks she needed. Too late, she told him. He had already made the mistake. He should pick them up. He bent down and collected the bottles with the same unhurried calm, placing them on the side table next to her wheelchair as if nothing had happened. No sigh, no tightening of the jaw, no mumbled frustration under his breath. Victoria felt the first stirring of something she had not experienced in months. Not respect exactly, but perhaps its distant cousin. Recognition. This one was different. She pressed harder. He was supposed to be angry now, supposed to tell her she was being unreasonable, supposed to walk out the door and leave her to her silence, and her pills and her view of a world she could no longer fully participate in. That was how this went. That was the script she had written and directed 23 times before. His answer stripped away her defenses in a way that months of therapy had never managed. He was not angry, he said, and the words carried the weight of simple truth. She wanted him to be angry because that would give her a reason to push him away. But he was not playing that game. He would be direct with her, he continued, and something in his tone made her actually listen. He needed this job. He had a 7-year-old daughter who needed shoes that did not pinch her growing feet, food that was not bought on credit, stability that did not depend on whether her father could find another position after being driven away by a wealthy woman with too much time and too little hope. He was not quitting over medication bottles or attitude. If she wanted him gone, she would have to fire him officially. Until then, he was there to help, whether she wanted it or not. Victoria Hartwell, who had built walls so high that even she had forgotten what lay behind them, felt the first stone shift. Not fall, not yet, but shift. A hairline crack in mortar that had seemed impenetrable. She had a daughter. The question emerged before Victoria could stop it, curiosity slipping past her defenses. Yes, he confirmed. Lily, 7 years old. Maya's age caught in Victoria's mind like a fishhook pulling at something she did not want to examine too closely. Where was she now? Victoria asked, and she was not entirely sure why she wanted to know. After-school program until 5 o'clock. Then he picked her up. His schedule was clear and non-negotiable. He would be here from 8 to 5. If evening duties were required, he could arrange childcare and return, but his daughter came first. This was not presented as an apology, but as a fact of a boundary drawn in permanent ink. Victoria's response was automatic, a reflex more than a genuine objection. She did not like children. His answer was practical to the point of dismissiveness. Good thing Lily would not be there then. Their eyes met and held for a long moment, two people taking each other's measure across a distance that felt both vast and strangely intimate. Finally, Victoria looked away, a concession she had not made to anyone in months. His duties would start with helping her through physical therapy. The equipment was in the gym downstairs. She hated every minute of it, and she would probably make him hate it too. He could handle it. 3 words spoken without bravado that somehow managed to sound like a promise. Victoria made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had contained any warmth. They would see about that. The gym occupied the entire lower level of the mansion's east wing, a space that had been professionally designed and equipped with the finest rehabilitation equipment money could buy. None of it had been Victoria's choice. Her mother had arranged everything after the accident, hiring specialists who had never met Victoria and decorating with a color palette meant to be soothing, and which Victoria found approximately as soothing as a dentist's waiting room. Parallel bars stood against one wall unused since their installation 18 months ago. A therapy pool sat empty, its cover gathering dust. State-of-the-art weight machines formed a semicircle around a padded mat, all of them adjusted to settings that Victoria had never progressed past. The physical therapy session unfolded exactly as she had promised. Every exercise became a battleground. She criticized his technique, questioned his understanding of basic anatomy, accused him of moving too fast and then too slow. When he asked her to extend her arm against the resistance band, she complained about the angle. When he adjusted the angle, she complained about the tension. When he adjusted the tension, she threw the band across the room. He retrieved it without comment and resumed the exercise. Halfway through the session, she caught him checking a laminated sheet of paper, the therapist's written instructions that outlined her daily routine. His adherence to the protocol was meticulous, and this infuriated her more than any improvisation would have. He was doing everything correctly, which meant she could not fault his technique. She could only fault herself, her broken body, her failure to make progress despite months of work. She was doing it wrong. The accusation burst out of her like steam from a pressure valve. His response was calm and unexpected. She should show him the right way then. Something cracked inside her, a fracture that had been forming for months. She could not show him the right way. That was the point. She could not do anything right anymore. The words tore out of her throat with more honesty than she had allowed herself in years. He did not flinch, did not offer platitudes, did not tell her everything would be fine. Instead, he asked a question that no one else had thought to ask. Then she should help him do it right for her. She should tell him what needed to adjust. The simplicity of it stunned her into silence. He was not trying to fix her. He was not promising a recovery. He was simply asking for collaboration, treating her as a partner in her own care rather than a problem to be solved. The session continued and something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in any way that Victoria would have admitted, but the edge had gone from her criticisms. Her complaints became more specific, more useful, less like weapons and more like actual feedback. By the end of the hour, she was exhausted and irritable, but underneath the familiar frustration, something else stirred, something that felt dangerously like hope. She announced that she was tired and wanted to rest. The words came out as a command, but they lacked their earlier venom. He offered to help her to the bedroom, and this time she did not argue. His hands were careful as he assisted with the transfer, professional, but not cold, supportive, but not condescending. He had clearly done this before, his movements carrying the economy of practiced experience. She found herself wondering about the other people he had cared for, the other broken bodies he had helped navigate a world designed for the whole. She lay back against the pillows, and without the wheelchair, she felt smaller somehow, more vulnerable, more human. Her observation emerged before she could stop it. He was not scared of her. No. Simple. Direct. Honest. Why not? The question contained genuine curiosity, perhaps for the first time that day. His answer cut through 2 years of carefully constructed defenses. He had seen people at their worst, he said. Grief, pain, fear, anger. She was not scary, she was just hurt. She told him not to psychoanalyze her, but the words lacked conviction. He was not psychoanalyzing, he said, just observing. He adjusted her pillows with the same careful attention he had given everything else that day, made sure the call button was within reach, and moved toward the door. He would be in the kitchen preparing lunch. She should call if she needed anything. As he reached the doorway, her voice stopped him. quieter now, stripped of its earlier hostility. He would quit, she said. They always did. He did not turn around. He had already told her. He did not quit easy. Then he was gone, and Victoria lay in her bedroom, surrounded by silence, staring at the ceiling, and wondering why those 4 words had felt more like a promise than anything she had heard in 2 years. The first day established a pattern that held through the week. Victoria tested Nathan constantly, an endless series of impossible demands, sudden reversals, and deliberate provocations. She sent him to fetch items that did not exist, criticized meals that met her exact specifications, and changed her requirements mid-task just to watch him adapt. Each test was designed to find the breaking point that everyone had, the moment when patience dissolved into frustration and frustration into surrender. Nathan remained calm through all of it, not passive, not doormat, submissive, but genuinely unruffled, as if her provocations were weather to be navigated rather than attacks to be defended against. He learned her routines, figured out which complaints were genuine and which were performance, started anticipating needs before she voiced them. When she threw her phone across the room on day 2, he retrieved it and suggested she might want a protective case. When she refused to eat lunch on day 3, he left the meal on the table and went about his other duties without comment, returning an hour later to find the plate empty. She was not accustomed to being outweighted. Her previous assistants had been easier to break, their patience thin and their need for approval transparent. This one seemed to operate on a different frequency, one where her approval was irrelevant and her disapproval simply part of the landscape. By day 3, she was still trying to drive him away, but the attempts had lost their earlier ferocity. Morning arrived with fog pressing against the windows, and Victoria found herself waiting for the sound of the front door, the now familiar rhythm of Nathan's footsteps in the hallway. When he appeared in her doorway at 8 o'clock exactly, she spoke before she could stop herself. He was still there. The words contained something that might have been wonder. He had told her he would be. His response was matter of fact, as if showing up were the most natural thing in the world. Most people were gone by now. She was stating a fact, but it sounded almost like a question. He was not most people. Clearly. And for the first time, the word was not an insult. On day 5, something shifted. The change was subtle at first, a gradual thawing that Victoria might have denied if anyone had pointed it out. They were in the living room, Nathan helping her with lunch, when a photograph fell from a shelf. He picked it up automatically, and Victoria watched his face as he registered what he was looking at. The image showed a woman on a mountain summit, arms raised in triumph, face alive, with a blush so pure it was almost painful to look at. She wore professional climbing gear, harness clips glinting in the sunlight, her body lean and strong and capable. Behind her, the peaks of the Sierra Nevada stretched toward a sky so blue it looked artificial. That was 3 years ago, Victoria said, before the accident. She had been free climbing at Yosemite, fell almost 50 feet. Lucky to be alive, they told her. Lucky. The word contained all the bitterness she could muster. Nathan studied the photograph, and Victoria found herself wondering what he saw. The person she used to be. The person she would never be again. The ghost of a life that had ended on a granite wall in California. He asked what happened, and his tone held no pity, only genuine curiosity. Equipment failure. Her harness clip broke. She should have checked it more carefully. The words came out flat, rehearsed a story she had told so many times that it had worn smooth. Now she lived with the consequences. But then something emerged that she had not shared with anyone except her therapist, and even then only grudgingly. Her father had taught her to climb. James Hartwell, founder of the Hartwell Foundation, philanthropist, businessman, and weekend mountaineer. He had put her in her first climbing harness when she was 6 years old, had taught her to read rock faces the way other fathers taught their children to read books. Mountains will teach you everything about yourself, he used to say. Patience, endurance, how to face fear. He had died when she was 25, just before she summited Denali for the first time. Nathan was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she had heard it. She missed it. The climbing. I miss everything. The movement, the freedom, the feeling of being capable. Now I cannot even stand up without help. He mentioned the physical therapist's notes. There was potential for some function to return with consistent work. Might, maybe, possibly. She had heard every qualified word in the medical dictionary. Meanwhile, she was stuck. The word came out harsh, final. His response was simple and infuriating. She was only stuck if she stopped trying. Victoria laughed, and there was no humor in it. Easy for him to say. Actually, it was not. Something in his tone made her look up from the photograph she had been staring at, made her actually see him. Perhaps for the first time since he had walked through her door. His wife had died 4 years ago. Cancer. Fast and brutal, the kind that announces itself with a cough and ends with a funeral in less than a year. She left him with a 3-year-old and no idea how to be both parents at once. He had been stuck too. Stuck in grief, stuck in fear, stuck in the feeling that he would never be enough for his daughter on his own. Victoria felt something shift inside her, a recognition that bypassed her defenses. She asked what changed. He had realized that being stuck was a choice. The grief was real. The fear was real. But staying paralyzed by them was something he was choosing. So he chose differently. She told him it was not the same thing, her voice lacking conviction. He agreed. His situation was different. But the principle was the same. She could let circumstances define her, or she could define herself despite circumstances. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, the photograph still in her hands. The woman in the image smiled back at her, triumphant and whole and utterly foreign. He made it sound simple. It was not simple, he said. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. But it was necessary. For his daughter. For himself. For the life he wanted them to have. That evening, as Nathan prepared to leave, Victoria called out to him. Just his last name at first, Brooks, and then a correction. Nathan. He turned back and she saw that he recognized the significance of the shift. First names were personal. First names meant something. He had lasted the week. Longer than anyone else. He would be there Monday too. The statement was simple and certain. Why? The question was genuine, perhaps the first genuine question she had asked since he arrived. Because she needed help. And because he was starting to think maybe she was not quite as impossible as she wanted people to believe. For the first time, Victoria smiled. It was small, barely visible, a crack of light in a wall that had been dark for 2 years. She told him not to tell anyone. She had a reputation to maintain. Her secret was safe with him. Driving across the city to pick up Lily, Nathan felt something unexpected settling into his chest. Not just relief at keeping the job, though that was certainly part of it. Something deeper. Something that felt like purpose. Victoria Hartwell was difficult, angry, determined to push everyone away. But underneath that armor, Nathan recognized something familiar. Someone who was terrified of being abandoned again. Someone who tested people to see if they would stay. Someone who needed to know she was not alone. Nathan understood that completely, because he had been that person too. After Sarah died, he had pushed away everyone who tried to help, convinced that their compassion was temporary, that eventually they would tire of his grief and leave him to drown in it alone. It had taken Lily's simple, stubborn love to remind him that some people stayed. Some people did not quit. The after-school program was housed in a former church community center, a squat brick building that had been cheerfully painted in primary colors and surrounded by a playground, showing the wear of countless small feet. Nathan parked in his usual spot and walked toward the entrance, already hearing the chaos of children at play leaking through the open windows. Lily spotted him before he reached the door, her face lighting up with the uncomplicated joy that only children possess. She ran toward him with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her hair escaping from the braids he had attempted that morning, her shoes showing the kind of wear that meant he would need to find money for new ones soon. She launched into a detailed account of her day before he could even say hello. There had been finger painting and a story about a dragon, and someone named Marcus had tried to eat glue, but Miss Patricia stopped him in time. The words tumbled over each other in their eagerness to be heard, and Nathan listened with the attention he always gave her, because these moments were the oxygen that kept him breathing. In the car, Lily asked about his new job. She knew he had started working for someone new, though he had kept the details vague. How was the lady in the big house, she wanted to know. Was she nice? Nathan considered his answer carefully. The lady in the big house was having a hard time, he said. She used to be able to do things that she could not do anymore, and that made her mad and sometimes angry. Lily nodded with the gravity of a much older child. Like when I got sick and could not go to Emma's birthday party. I was sad and angry too. Something like that, Nathan agreed. But instead of missing a party, she missed being able to walk and climb mountains and do all the things she loved. Lily was quiet for a moment, processing this. That is very sad, she finally said. Does she have anyone to make her feel better? Nathan thought about the empty mansion, the silence, the way Victoria's voice echoed off walls that had been designed for entertaining and now witnessed only solitude. Not really, he admitted. That is part of why I am there. To try to help. You are good at helping Daddy. Lily's voice carried absolute conviction. You help me feel better when I am sad about Mommy. The words hit Nathan like a physical force, the casual way children could say things that cut straight to the heart. He blinked against the sudden sting in his eyes and reached back to squeeze Lily's hand. I try, baby girl. I try. They went home to the apartment that was too small and too old but was theirs. Nathan made dinner while Lily did homework at the kitchen table, her tongue poking out in concentration as she worked through addition problems. The evening routine was familiar and comforting, dinner bath time stories, the gradual negotiation towards sleep that all parents of 7-year-olds knew intimately. After Lily was finally down, Nathan sat alone in the living room with a beer he could barely afford and thought about the woman in the wheelchair and the photograph of who she used to be. He thought about his own photograph, the one that sat on his nightstand, Sarah laughing at something he had said, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. That version of his life was as unreachable as Victoria's summit, locked away in a past that could not be revisited. But the future was still unwritten. That was what he had learned in the years since Sarah's death. You could not change what had happened, but you could choose how to move forward. You could choose to stay stuck, or you could choose to take one step, then another, until you looked up and realized you had traveled further than you ever thought possible. He wondered if Victoria was capable of learning that lesson. He wondered if anyone could teach it to her, or if it was the kind of knowledge that could only be discovered through suffering and survival and the slow, painful decision to live anyway. He finished his beer and went to bed, and for the first time in months, he fell asleep without the familiar weight of dread pressing against his chest. Monday arrived with the kind of California sunshine that made everything seem possible. Nathan dropped Lily at school with the usual flurry of kisses and reminders about lunchboxes and behavior, then drove across the city to the hillside mansion that was starting to feel less like enemy territory and more like a puzzle he was slowly learning to solve. Angela let him in with a nod that might have contained a hint of respect. The housekeeper had worked for the Hartwell family for over 20 years, had seen Victoria grow from a fearless child into a driven young woman into the bitter shadow who now occupied the wheelchair. She had watched 23 assistants come and go, had prepared resignation paperwork so many times that she kept blank copies in her desk. This one was different, her eyes seemed to say. She was not sure how, but she could feel it. Victoria was in her father's study, a room Nathan had not yet entered. He paused in the doorway, taking in the space that clearly belonged to a different era of this house. Heavy wooden furniture, leather-bound books lining the walls, a massive desk that looked like it had been designed to intimidate. Photographs everywhere, most of them showing a man Nathan assumed was James Hartwell, often in climbing gear, often on various mountaintops around the world. She did not turn when he entered her wheelchair, positioned in front of a large window that looked out over the garden. Her voice was quieter than usual when she spoke. This was her father's room. She had not come in here since before the accident, not once in 2 years. Nathan remained silent, sensing that she needed to fill the space with her own words. He built the Hartwell Foundation from nothing, she continued. Started with a small grant program for disabled athletes, grew it into one of the largest disability advocacy organizations on the West Coast. He believed everyone deserved a second chance. The irony was not lost on her, becoming the very thing he had dedicated his life to helping. Nathan moved closer, looking at the photographs. James Hartwell had been a tall man, with Victoria's sharp cheekbones and determined jaw. In every image, even the formal ones, there was a spark of something wild in his eyes, a restlessness that the camera could not quite contain. One photograph caught Nathan's attention. It showed James and a much younger Victoria standing at what appeared to be a base camp, mountains rising behind them, both of them grinning with the shared excitement of an adventure about to begin. Victoria noticed where he was looking. Denali Base Camp, she said, the summer before he died. He had been planning to climb it with her, but his heart was not strong enough. Undiagnosed condition. She went alone after he passed, summited on what would have been his 65th birthday. That must have been hard, Nathan said. Climbing without him. Hard was not the word. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, but also the most important. She felt like he was with her every step of the way, like he was guiding her feet, steadying her hands. When she reached the summit, she scattered some of his ashes, left a part of him on the mountain he had always dreamed of conquering. Nathan was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of what she had shared. It occurred to him that he was perhaps the first person she had talked to about this since the accident, the first person who had stayed long enough to earn these confidences. The silence was broken by the sound of the front door opening, followed by footsteps that carried the confidence of ownership. Victoria's expression changed instantly, the openness disappearing behind the familiar mask of cold indifference. A woman's voice echoed through the house, calling Victoria's name with an authority that expected immediate response. The voice grew closer, and then Margaret Hartwell appeared in the doorway of her late husband's study. She was 68 years old but carried herself like someone who had stopped counting birthdays at 50. Her silver hair was styled with salon precision. Her clothes were expensive without being flashy, and her eyes held the kind of sharpness that came from decades of navigating high society and corporate boardrooms. She looked at Nathan the way one might look at an unexpected insect that had found its way indoors. Her assessment was rapid and thorough. She noted his worn jacket, his practical shoes, his posture that was neither servile nor aggressive. Her conclusion was visible in the slight tightening around her mouth. He was not what she had expected, which was not necessarily a good thing. Victoria, she said, her attention shifting to her daughter. I heard you had a new assistant. I wanted to see for myself. The words carried subtext that Nathan could read even without knowing the history. Margaret Hartwell had not driven across the city on a Monday morning simply to verify employment records. There was something else happening here, something that made Victoria's hands tighten on her wheelchair controls. Mother, Victoria's voice was flat, carefully neutral. I did not know you were coming. That was the point. Margaret moved further into the room, her presence somehow making the space feel smaller. She wanted to see how her daughter was actually living, not the performance Victoria put on during scheduled visits. Nathan felt the tension building like static electricity before a storm. He cleared his throat quietly. He would be in the kitchen if they needed anything, he said. He would give them privacy. Margaret's gaze snapped to him. He would stay, actually, since he was apparently the reason her daughter had emerged from her room for the first time in weeks. The accusation was implicit and clear. Victoria bristled visibly. Nathan was her employee, she said. He did not have anything to do with her personal choices. Did he not? Margaret replied. She had sources who said otherwise. According to her information, Victoria had been in her father's study this morning, had eaten breakfast in the dining room instead of her bedroom, had actually participated in physical therapy instead of simply going through the motions. All since this new assistant arrived. And those were bad things, Victoria asked, her voice rising. Progress was suddenly a problem. Progress was wonderful. Margaret's tone suggested it was anything but. What concerned her was the motivation for that progress. A wealthy, vulnerable woman and a single father who needed money. She had seen this story before. Nathan felt his own temper stirring a rare occurrence. With respect, he said, and the words were measured and careful, Victoria's progress had nothing to do with him. She was doing the work. He was just there to support her. Margaret turned to him, fully, her assessment becoming more pointed. He was there to support her. How noble. And what exactly did he hope to get out of this arrangement? A paycheck, Nathan replied. Same as any employee, just a paycheck, nothing more. Victoria cut in before Nathan could respond. Enough, Mother. She would not sit here and listen to accusations. Nathan had been professional and helpful. That was more than she could say for the previous 23 people who had held this position. 23 people, Margaret repeated, and none of them lasted. But somehow this one was different. She did not find that suspicious at all. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut, but Nathan refused to rise to it. He understood what Margaret was doing because he had seen it before in other contexts with other families. She was protecting her daughter the only way she knew how, by assuming the worst about everyone who got close. It was not admirable, but it was understandable. Victoria's response was sharp and final. What she found suspicious was her mother's sudden interest in her well-being. Where had this concern been when she was lying in a hospital bed for 3 months? Where was it when Derek left and she had no one? Margaret's expression flickered a crack in the armor that was quickly repaired. That was unfair, she said. She had been there. She had arranged the best care, the best equipment, the best therapists. Things Victoria shot back. She had arranged things. But she had not been there herself, not really, not in the ways that mattered. The silence that followed was heavy with years of unspoken grievances. Nathan felt like an intruder in a private war, a witness to wounds that had been festering long before he arrived. Margaret was the first to break the tension. She had not come to fight, she said, and her voice had lost some of its edge. She had come because the foundation board was meeting next week. They wanted to know Victoria's intentions. Victoria's laugh was bitter, her intentions. She was paralyzed in case her mother had forgotten. What intentions could she possibly have? The foundation board did not see paralysis as an impediment to leadership, Margaret replied. Franklin Roosevelt ran the country from a wheelchair. What the board saw was a chair that had been empty for 2 years. They were asking questions, making noise about changes in leadership. They wanted to remove her as chair, Victoria translated, after everything her father built. They wanted to know if she was coming back. There was a difference. If she showed up, demonstrated that she was still engaged, they would fall in line. But if she continued to hide in this house, refusing to participate in her own life, they would have no choice but to act. Victoria's face had gone pale. The foundation was her father's legacy. It was all she had left of him. Then perhaps she should start acting like it, Margaret said. Her voice had softened, slightly revealing something that might have been genuine concern beneath the criticism. James would not have wanted this for her. He would not have wanted her to give up. The words hung in the air and Nathan watched Victoria absorb them. He saw the conflict playing out across her features, the anger and the grief and the fear warring for dominance. Margaret glanced at her watch. She had a lunch meeting, she said, but she would be back. They had more to discuss. The board meeting was in 10 days. She hoped Victoria would use that time wisely. She left without saying goodbye to Nathan, without acknowledging him at all. He heard her heels clicking down the hallway, heard the front door open and close, heard the sound of a car engine starting and fading into the distance. Victoria sat motionless in her wheelchair, staring at the photograph of her father on Denali. Nathan waited, giving her space to process what had just happened. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and tired. Her mother was right. She was hiding. She had been hiding for 2 years, and now she was about to lose the only thing that still connected her to her father. The foundation, Nathan said. It was important to her. It was everything. Her father had built it from nothing, had poured his heart and soul into it, and she had abandoned it, abandoned him. She had not abandoned anything, Nathan said. She had survived. There was a difference. Victoria looked at him, and her eyes were wet. Everyone kept telling her to survive, she said, to be grateful she was alive. But what was the point of surviving if she could not live? What was the point of a life spent in this chair, in this house, watching the world go by through windows? The point, Nathan said, was that she got to decide what came next. The accident had taken a lot from her. Her mobility, her career, her relationship. But it had not taken her mind. It had not taken her ability to make choices. She could choose to stay stuck, or she could choose to move forward. It was up to her. Easy for him to say, Victoria replied. He could walk out of here any time. He could climb stairs and run marathons and do anything he wanted. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. The image showed a young woman in a hospital bed, her head wrapped in bandages, tubes running from her arms to machines that blinked with cold efficiency. She looked fragile, broken, barely alive. His wife, Nathan, said, Sarah. 3 weeks before she died, the cancer had spread to her brain by then. She could not walk, could not feed herself, could barely speak. But every day she made a choice. She chose to smile at their daughter. She chose to squeeze his hand when he held hers. She chose to be present, to be loving, to be herself, even when everything else had been stripped away. Victoria stared at the photograph, at the face of a woman she had never met but somehow understood. On her last day, Nathan continued, Sarah had told him something he had never forgotten. She said that life was not about what you could do. It was about who you were. The body was just a vehicle. The person inside was what mattered. She had looked him in the eyes and made him promise to remember that, to teach it to their daughter, to live it himself even after she was gone. He put the phone away. He still struggled with that promise, he admitted. Some days were harder than others, but he tried. Every day he tried to be the person Sarah had believed he could be, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Victoria was crying now, tears sliding down her cheeks without sound. When was the last time she had actually cried? She could not remember. She had been so focused on being angry, on being bitter, on pushing everyone away before they could hurt her. She had forgotten how to feel anything else. She was scared, she admitted. The words came out broken, barely audible. Terrified, actually, of the foundation, of the board, of trying and failing, of proving that she really was as worthless as she felt. Nathan moved closer, crouching beside her wheelchair so they were at eye level. She was not worthless, he said. She was a woman who had survived a fall that should have killed her. She was a woman who had climbed mountains and built a legacy and faced down every assistant who walked through her door. She was scared, yes, but scared was not the same as weak. Scared just meant she had something to lose. What if she lost it anyway, she asked. What if she tried and failed? Then she would have tried. That was more than she could say right now. And trying, even if it ended in failure, was better than never knowing what might have been. Victoria looked at the photograph of her father again, at his wild eyes and his fearless smile. He would have said the same thing, she realized. He would have told her to get out of her own way and climb the damn mountain even if she fell again. Especially if she fell again. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She wanted to try standing, she said. The physical therapist had mentioned the parallel bars months ago, but she had refused. Now she wanted to try. Nathan nodded. They would take it slow, he said. There was no rush, but yes, they would try. Okay, Victoria said. And for the first time in 2 years, the word felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. They made their way to the gym, the wheelchair humming softly as Victoria navigated the familiar route. The parallel bars stood against the wall like a challenge waiting to be accepted. Nathan positioned this chair between them and helped Victoria grip the bars securely. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. This was the moment she had been avoiding, the moment that would prove whether any recovery was possible or whether she was condemned to spend the rest of her life exactly as she was. On 3, Nathan said. He would help her stand. The frame would hold most of her weight. He would support her torso. Was she ready? No, she admitted, but they should do it anyway. 1, 2, 3. Victoria pushed with her arms while Nathan provided support. Her legs trembled, barely holding any weight at all. For a moment, she felt like she was going to collapse, like her body was going to betray her one more time. Then something happened. Her feet were on the ground. Her legs were holding just barely, but they were holding. She was standing. 5 seconds passed, then her legs gave out and she sat back heavily in the wheelchair, gasping with exertion. She had done it. The words came out of her mouth before she could stop them, wonder and disbelief mixing in equal measure. She had actually stood up. 5 seconds, Nathan confirmed. That was incredible. 5 seconds was nothing, she protested. It was barely a moment. It was 5 more seconds than she had managed in 2 years, he replied. That was not nothing. That was progress. Victoria looked down at her legs, at the limbs that had failed her so completely, and for the first time she saw them not as enemies, but as allies who needed rehabilitation. They were weak, yes. Damaged, certainly. But not dead, not hopeless, not impossible. Tomorrow they would try for 6 seconds, Nathan said. Then 7. That was how progress worked. What if she could not do more, Victoria asked. What if this was as good as it got? Then this was as good as it got, he replied. And she would learn to build a life within those parameters. But he did not think this was her limit. He thought she was stronger than she believed. She wanted to argue with him, to retreat behind her familiar walls of pessimism and self-protection. But something had changed in the past few minutes, something fundamental. For the first time since the accident, she had proven to herself that her body was not entirely beyond her control. For the first time, she had evidence that progress was possible. Thank you, she said. The words were awkward in her mouth, unpracticed but genuine. She was welcome, Nathan replied. Same time tomorrow. He helped her back to the main floor, and Victoria found herself looking at her house with different eyes. The silence that had felt oppressive now seemed merely quiet. The emptiness that had weighed on her seemed less permanent. Nothing had changed, really. She was still paralyzed. Still facing a board meeting that could strip away her father's legacy. Still alone in a mansion designed for a life she could no longer live. But she had stood. For 5 seconds, she had stood on her own 2 feet. And if she could do that, maybe she could do other things too. Maybe she could face the board. Maybe she could honor her father's memory. Maybe she could stop hiding and start living again. It was a small hope, fragile and new, but it was there. That evening, Nathan picked up Lily and took her for ice cream, a rare treat that the budget did not usually allow. His daughter sensed something different in him and asked what had happened at work. He told her that the lady in the big house had done something brave today, something she had been scared to do for a long time. Lily nodded sagely. Being brave when you are scared is the hardest kind of brave, she said. That is what Mommy used to tell me. Nathan felt his heart squeeze. Sarah had said that countless times whenever Lily faced something difficult. Being brave did not mean not being scared. Being brave meant being scared and doing it anyway. He thought about Victoria standing between those parallel bars, terror in her eyes and determination in her jaw. He thought about the 5 seconds she had managed, the first 5 seconds of a journey that might take months or years or might never reach the destination she hoped for. Being brave when you were scared was the hardest kind of brave. And Victoria Hartwell, for all her walls and her bitterness and her sharp edges, was one of the bravest people he had ever met. The week continued, each day building on the one before. Victoria's standing time increased from 5 seconds to 8, then to 12. She began to engage more actively with her physical therapy, asking questions instead of just complaining, suggesting modifications that she thought might work better. The hostility that had defined their early interactions faded into something else, something that might have been respect. Nathan learned more about the Hartwell Foundation during their conversations. James Hartwell had started it 30 years ago with a modest endowment and an ambitious vision. He believed that disability was not a limitation, but a different way of experiencing the world. He had funded adaptive sports programs, accessibility initiatives, employment assistance for disabled workers. By the time he died, the foundation had grown into a major force in the disability advocacy space with a multi-million-dollar budget and partnerships with organizations around the world. Victoria had been groomed to take over since childhood. She had served on the board since her 20s, had taken the chair position after her father's death. For 2 years, she had led with the same fierce determination she brought to her climbing. Then the accident happened and everything stopped. The board had been patient at first, understanding that recovery took time. But 2 years had passed and Victoria had shown no signs of returning. They had brought in interim leadership, had continued the foundation's work without her. Now they were asking questions, making noises about permanent changes. The vultures were circling. Nathan asked about the specific concerns. What exactly was the board threatening? Victoria's expression darkened. There was a faction that wanted to merge the foundation with a larger organization. More resources, they claimed. Greater reach. But Victoria knew what it really meant. It meant losing independence. It meant losing her father's name. It meant everything James Hartwell had built being absorbed into something else, something that would forget where it came from. And she could stop. That, Nathan asked. If she went back, she could try. Her name still carried weight. Her father's legacy still meant something. But she would have to show up. She would have to prove that she was still capable of leading. Was she, Nathan asked. Capable. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she told him something she had not told anyone else. Before the accident, she had been working on an expansion plan for the foundation. A new initiative focused on adaptive recreation, helping people with disabilities experience outdoor activities they thought were impossible. Rock climbing, skiing, kayaking, all the things she had loved made accessible to people who shared her passion but not her physical abilities. The accident had ended that project. She had locked away the plans, convinced that she had no right to promote outdoor recreation when she could not participate in it herself. But lately she had been thinking, maybe her experience as a disabled person made her more qualified, not less. Maybe she understood the challenges in a way she never could have before. Nathan told her that sounded like exactly the kind of project the foundation needed, something that connected to its history while moving it forward. But could she do it from a wheelchair? Victoria asked. Could she advocate for outdoor recreation when she could not even walk? There was a man named Eric Weihenmeyer, Nathan told her, blind since he was 13 years old. He climbed Mount Everest in 2001, became the first blind person to reach the summit. He did not let his disability stop him from doing what he loved. He used it, made it part of his story. Victoria stared at him. How did he know about Eric Weihenmayer? Nathan smiled slightly. He had done some research. When someone told him something was impossible, he liked to find examples of people who had proven otherwise. She did not know whether to be touched or annoyed. Both, she decided. It was becoming a familiar feeling around him. The days passed and the board meeting drew closer. Victoria began preparing, reviewing financial reports and strategic plans that had accumulated during her 2-year absence. Nathan helped when he could not with the business details that were beyond his expertise, but with the practical aspects of her recovery. Every day she stood a little longer. Every day the future felt a little less hopeless. Lily came back the following week when school was closed for a teacher workday. This time Victoria was prepared for the visit, and Nathan noticed that her demeanor was entirely different from the first encounter. She greeted Lily with something approaching warmth, asked about school, admired the new drawings in her backpack. Lily, with the social fearlessness of childhood, immediately launched into a detailed explanation of her latest art project. She was drawing a series about a magical knight who went on adventures with a dragon named Spark. The knight had special powers that helped her overcome obstacles. Also, the knight had a friend who was a talking squirrel, but she had not figured out the squirrel's name yet. Victoria listened to the entire explanation with an attention that Nathan had never seen her give anyone else. When Lily finished, she asked if she could see the drawings. Lily produced them, proudly spreading them across the coffee table. The knight was a feminine figure in silver armor. The dragon was large and friendly-looking, with scales that Lily had colored in every shade of purple she possessed. In each drawing, the knight and dragon were facing some kind of challenge. A steep mountain, a dark forest, a river too wide to cross. In every single image, the knight was depicted in a wheelchair. Nathan noticed it at the same time Victoria did. He watched her face as she processed what she was seeing. "Lily," Victoria said softly, "why is the knight in a wheelchair?" Lily looked at her as if the answer were obvious. "Because the knight is like you. She cannot walk, but she still goes on adventures. Spark helps her. That is what friends do." Victoria's eyes were glistening. "But knights are supposed to be strong and brave," she said. "They are supposed to fight battles and rescue people." "The knight is strong and brave," Lily replied with 7-year-old certainty. "Being in a wheelchair does not mean you are not strong. My daddy says everyone is strong in different ways." Nathan felt his throat tighten. He had said that to Lily many times, usually when she was frustrated about something she could not do some way. She felt less than the other kids at school. He had not realized she had internalized it so completely. Victoria was openly crying now, tears streaming down her face. She made no effort to hide them. "Can I keep one of these?" she asked. "Would that be okay?" Lily considered the request seriously. She could have the one with the mountain, she decided. That was her favorite because the knight looked so happy at the top. Victoria took the drawing with trembling hands. It showed the knight in her wheelchair at the summit of a tall mountain, arms raised in triumph, the dragon beside her, looking equally celebratory. It was simple, childish, drawn with crayons and colored pencils. It was also one of the most beautiful things Victoria had ever seen. "Thank you," she said to Lily. "This is the best present anyone has ever given me." Lily beamed. She could make more. Did Victoria want one with the talking squirrel? She has decided his name was going to be Chester. Victoria laughed, a genuine laugh that seemed to surprise her as much as anyone. "Yes," she said, "she would very much like one with Chester." After Lily had settled into a corner with her art supplies, happily working on new adventures for the knight and Spark, and Chester, Victoria gestured for Nathan to come closer. She needed to tell him something, she said, and her voice was quiet but steady. Nathan waited. She had been scared to try standing because she was afraid of failing. But she had been even more scared of succeeding, because if she could stand, if she could make progress, then she had no excuse anymore. She would have to actually try to live. She would have to face the foundation and the board and everything else she had been hiding from. Lily's drawing had made her realize something. The knight in the wheelchair was not limited by her disability. She was defined by her courage, by her willingness to go on adventures even when the path was difficult, by her friendship with a dragon who carried her when she could not walk. Victoria looked at Nathan with an intensity that made him catch his breath. He was her dragon, she said. She did not know why he had stayed when everyone else had left. She did not know what she had done to deserve his patience and his kindness, but she was grateful, more grateful than she knew how to express. Nathan did not know how to respond to that. He was just doing his job, he started to say. Victoria cut him off. He was doing more than his job. He had given her hope, and hope was something she had not felt in a very long time. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling between them. Then Lily called out that she had finished the squirrel drawing and wanted to show everyone. The moment passed, but something had changed. Some barrier had fallen that would not be rebuilt. Nathan was not sure what that meant for their professional relationship, for the boundaries that should exist between an employee and employer. But he knew that Victoria Hartwell had started the morning as his client and ended it as something else, something more complicated, something that he was not quite ready to name. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Victoria spent the days leading up to it in a frenzy of preparation, reviewing documents, practicing speeches, running through possible scenarios with Nathan as a sounding board. She had decided to attend in person, to wheel herself into that conference room and face the people who wanted to take her father's legacy away from her. Nathan helped her prepare physically as well. Every morning they worked on her standing time, pushing past the limits of what she had thought possible. By the day before the meeting, Victoria could stand for almost a full minute. Her legs still shook and she still needed the parallel bars for support, but she could do it. She could stand. More importantly, she had regained something that no amount of physical therapy could have provided. She had regained her will to fight. The night before the meeting, Victoria asked Nathan to stay late. She needed to practice her presentation one more time, she said, but he could tell there was something else on her mind. They went through the slides, the budget projections, the strategic vision she was proposing. It was good work, compelling and thorough. Anyone who listened with an open mind would be convinced that Victoria Hartwell was still the right person to lead the foundation. But not everyone would have an open mind, Victoria admitted when they finished. There was a faction on the board that had already made up their minds. They wanted her out. They wanted the merger. They saw her disability as evidence that she was no longer capable. Could she change their minds? Nathan asked. She did not know, but she had to try. Her father had built something important, something that helped people who needed help. She could not let it be swallowed up by some faceless corporate entity that cared more about tax benefits than actual impact. Nathan told her she would do great. She knew this material better than anyone. She had her father's passion and her own experience. That was a powerful combination. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that caught him completely off guard. She wanted to stand, she said, at the meeting. Not for the whole presentation, just for a moment. Just long enough to show them that she was not done fighting. Nathan hesitated. That was risky, he said. What if something went wrong? What if her legs gave out? Then she would fall. Victoria replied, and she would get back up. That was what her father would have done. That was what any real climber did when they lost their grip. They did not give up. They found another handhold and started again. Nathan thought about it. Then he asked what she needed from him. She needed him there, she said, not in the meeting itself that was board members only, but in the building, waiting, knowing that someone was on her side. He would be there, Nathan promised, whatever she needed. Victoria smiled, and it was a real smile, one that transformed her face and made her look like the woman in the summit photograph. Thank you, she said, for everything. He was just doing his job, Nathan replied. Victoria shook her head. He was doing so much more than that, and someday she hoped she could return the favor. The board meeting was held in the foundation's downtown offices, a sleek modern building with the Hartwell name etched in stone above the entrance. Nathan drove Victoria there in her adapted vehicle, helped her transfer to her wheelchair, and walked beside her as she made her way through the lobby. People stared. Nathan watched them, watching her, saw the mixture of surprise and curiosity and discomfort on their faces. This was what Victoria lived with every day, the constant awareness of being seen as different, as other, as something to be pitied or avoided. But Victoria held her head high. She navigated the building with the confidence of someone who belonged there, who had walked these halls 100 times before, who refused to be diminished by the chair that carried her. At the elevator, she turned to Nathan. She would be okay from here, she said. The meeting room was on the 4th floor. She knew the way. He should not come up with her, Nathan asked. This was something she had to do alone, Victoria replied. But knowing he was here waiting, that mattered. That was enough. Nathan watched her wheel into the elevator, watched the doors close, and then found a seat in the lobby to wait. The minutes stretched into hours. He tried to read, tried to check his phone, tried to do anything except watch the elevator and wonder what was happening 4 floors above. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the elevator doors opened and Victoria emerged. Her face was unreadable, composed in a way that could have meant anything. Nathan stood searching for clues. "How did it go?" he asked. Victoria wheeled toward him without speaking. When she was close enough, she stopped, looked up at him and smiled. She had done it, she said. She had stood up in front of all of them, stood on her own 2 feet for almost 30 seconds while she delivered the key points of her proposal. Her legs had shaken and she had felt like she might collapse at any moment, but she had not. She had stood and she had spoken and she had refused to let them see her as anything less than capable. The vote was scheduled for next week, she continued. But after what happened in that room, she was cautiously optimistic. Several board members who had been undecided had approached her afterward. They had been moved by her presentation, by her courage, by her vision. She might actually win this, Victoria said. She might actually save her father's legacy. Nathan felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had not realized he was carrying. That was incredible, he said. She should be proud. She was, Victoria admitted. For the first time in 2 years, she was actually proud of herself. They drove back to the mansion in comfortable silence, the city passing by outside the windows. When they arrived, Nathan helped Victoria into the house and asked if she needed anything else before he left. Victoria hesitated. There was one thing she said. She wanted to go to her father's grave. She had not been since the funeral. She had not been able to face it. But now after today, she wanted to tell him what she had done. Nathan asked if she wanted company. She did, Victoria admitted. She did not think she could do this alone. The cemetery was on the outskirts of the city, a peaceful green space dotted with monuments and trees. James Hartwell's grave was marked by a simple stone with his name and dates and a small engraving of a mountain peak. Victoria sat beside it in her wheelchair, and Nathan stood a respectful distance away, giving her space while remaining close enough to offer support. She talked to her father for a long time, told him about the accident and the aftermath, the dark years of anger and isolation. Told him about the assistants who came and went, about her mother's pressure and Derek's abandonment. Told him about Nathan and Lily, about standing for the first time in 2 years, about facing the board with his name on her lips and his courage in her heart. She had been so lost, she said, so convinced that her life was over. But she was starting to find her way back, slowly and perfectly, but forward, always forward. When she finally fell silent, Nathan approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. James Hartwell would have been proud, he said. Any father would be. Victoria reached up and covered his hand with hers. Thank you, she said, for bringing me here, for staying. He was not going anywhere, Nathan replied. She could count on that. They left the cemetery as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected off the city's glass towers. It had been a long day, emotionally exhausting in ways that physical therapy never was. But Victoria felt lighter than she had in years. The weight she had been carrying, the guilt and the grief and the fear had not disappeared entirely. But it had shifted. It was no longer crushing her. She could breathe. Back at the mansion, Nathan helped Victoria inside and made sure she was settled before preparing to leave. Lily would be waiting for him, and he had already been gone longer than usual. At the door, Victoria stopped him one last time. She needed to say something. She said something she should have said weeks ago. Nathan waited. She had been horrible to him when he first arrived. Victoria admitted. She had tried everything to drive him away. Thrown things made impossible demands, treated him with contempt that he did not deserve. And through all of it, he had stayed. He had seen past her anger to the fear underneath. He had refused to give up on her even when she had given up on herself. She did not know how to repay that. She continued. She was not even sure she could, but she wanted him to know that it mattered, that he mattered, that somewhere along the way he had stopped being her employee and started being her friend. Nathan did not know how to respond to that level of emotional honesty, so he said the only thing he could think of. She was welcome, he told her, and for what it was worth, she had become his friend too. Victoria smiled, and there were tears in her eyes, but they were not sad tears. They were the tears of someone who had been drowning and finally reached the surface, someone who had been lost and was starting to find their way home. Nathan left the mansion and drove across the city to pick up Lily. his mind full of everything that had happened. He thought about Victoria standing before the board, her legs shaking but her voice steady. He thought about the drawing Lily had made the night in the wheelchair, who refused to let anything stop her. He thought about Sarah, who had faced death with more grace than he had ever managed to live, and who had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward anyway. Lily was waiting for him at the after-school program, bouncing with energy and full of stories about her day. Nathan scooped her up and held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of crayons and playground dirt. "How was the lady in the big house?" Lily asked as they walked to the car. "She was brave today," Nathan told her. "Really brave." Lily nodded as if this were exactly what she expected. "Good," she said. "I knew she could do it." Out of the mouths of babes, Nathan thought. His daughter had more faith in Victoria than Victoria had ever had in herself. And maybe that was the key. Maybe sometimes you needed someone else to believe in you before you could believe in yourself. They drove home through the gathering darkness, the city lights coming on one by one like stars descending to earth. Nathan felt something settling in his chest, a sense of rightness that he had not experienced in years. He did not know what the future held for Victoria or for himself. He did not know if she would win the board vote or save the foundation or ever walk again. But he knew that whatever happened, they would face it together. That was what mattered. That was all that mattered. The vote came the following week, and Victoria won. Not unanimously, but decisively enough that the merger faction was forced to concede defeat. The Hartwell Foundation would remain independent. James Hartwell's legacy was safe. When Nathan arrived for work the morning after the vote, Victoria was waiting for him in the foyer. She was smiling, really smiling, with a light in her eyes that he had never seen before. "They did it," she said. "They actually did it." "She did it," Nathan corrected. He had just been along for the ride. Victoria shook her head. She could not have done any of it without him. The standing, the courage, the decision to fight instead of surrender. He had given her that. He and Lily both. Speaking of Lily, Victoria continued, she had a proposition. She wanted to hire Nathan permanently, not as an assistant, but as a partner. She was launching the adaptive recreation initiative she had told him about, the one she had abandoned after the accident. She needed someone to help her build it, someone who understood care work, someone who believed in second chances. The salary would be significantly higher than what he was making now, she added. Enough that he would not have to worry about Lily's shoes or food or any of the small anxieties that plagued single parents living paycheck to paycheck. She had already talked to her lawyers. It was all above board, no conflict of interest, nothing improper. Nathan was stunned. He had not expected this. He had not even allowed himself to imagine it. Why him, he asked. She could hire anyone. She could hire people with advanced degrees and impressive resumes and years of experience in nonprofit management. Because she trusted him, Victoria replied simply. Because he had seen her at her worst and stayed anyway. Because he understood what it meant to rebuild a life from broken pieces. Because his daughter drew pictures of knights in wheelchairs who went on adventures with dragons. Nathan thought about Lily, about the stability this could provide, about the chances it would open up, about the future that suddenly seemed full of possibility instead of just survival. He would need time to think about it, he said. This was a big decision. Victoria nodded. Of course. Take all the time he needed. The offer would remain open. Nathan went through the rest of his workday in a daze. He helped Victoria with physical therapy, prepared her meals, accompanied her to a follow-up appointment with her medical team. But his mind was elsewhere, turning over the possibilities that Victoria's offer represented. That evening, he picked up Lily and took her to their favorite park. She ran and played while he sat on a bench and watched, thinking about choices and consequences and the strange paths that life sometimes took. Lily eventually tired herself out and came to sit beside him, leaning against his side in the comfortable way of children who know they are loved. "Daddy," she said, "are you thinking about something important?" Nathan admitted, he was thinking about whether to take a new job. Would it be a good job? Lily asked. He thought so. It would mean more money, more stability. It would mean working with the lady in the big house on something that could help a lot of people. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important decisions. "Would you still be able to pick me up from school?" Nathan promised that he would. That would never change, no matter what job he took. "Then you should do it," Lily declared. "The lady in the big house needs you, and helping people is good." Nathan hugged his daughter tight. She was wise beyond her years, this little girl who had lost her mother and kept her optimism anyway. She was the best thing that had ever happened to him. The next morning, he gave Victoria his answer. Yes, Victoria's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. She held out her hand and Nathan shook it. A deal, a partnership, a new beginning. They got to work immediately. There was so much to do, so many plans to make, so many people to help. Victoria threw herself into the project with the same intensity she had once brought to climbing mountains, and Nathan matched her step for step. They argued about budgets and strategies and timelines. They brainstormed ideas late into the evening. They built something together, something that neither of them could have built alone. Lily became a regular presence at the mansion, her drawings covering the walls of Victoria's office. Spark the dragon and Chester the squirrel went on adventures that grew more elaborate with each iteration. The knight in the wheelchair faced challenges and overcame them again and again, never giving up no matter how difficult the path became. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Victoria began to walk again. Not without support, not without effort, but walking nonetheless. Steps became strides, became journeys across rooms and down hallways, and eventually one memorable afternoon, out the front door and into the garden she had not visited in 2 years. Nathan was beside her for all of it. Every stumble, every triumph, every moment of fear and frustration and joy. He had come to this mansion as a desperate man, looking for a paycheck, and he had found something he had not known he was searching for. Purpose, connection, hope. Victoria had come to this story as a broken woman, hiding from her grief, and she had found something she had not believed possible. Strength, courage, a reason to keep climbing. And Lily, the 7-year-old artist who saw magic in wheelchairs and friendship in dragons, had given them both a gift more precious than either of them could have imagined. She had given them the ability to see themselves through different eyes, to believe that the knight in the wheelchair could still be a hero, to understand that sometimes the greatest adventures were not about reaching the summit, but about finding the courage to take the first step. The mansion on the hillside was no longer silent. Laughter echoed through its halls, the sound of people who had found each other and decided to build something beautiful together. It was not perfect. It was not easy, but it was real and it was theirs, and it was just the beginning. Outside the window, the fog rolled in from the bay, wrapping itself around the city like a blanket. But inside the house that had once been a prison, a woman in a wheelchair was standing up. A man who had lost everything was finding it again. And a little girl was drawing another adventure, another mountain, another dragon waiting to carry them wherever they needed to go. This was not the end of their story. It was barely the start. But for now, for this moment, it was enough. The weeks following Victoria's board victory brought a rhythm to the mansion that none of its walls had known in years. Nathan arrived each morning at 8 sometimes with Lily in tow, when school schedules demanded 8, and the house that had once echoed with silence now hummed with the quiet industry of people building something together. The Adaptive Recreation Initiative consumed their days spreadsheets and proposals, and endless phone calls with potential partners who needed convincing that a woman in a wheelchair could lead an outdoor adventure program. Victoria threw herself into the work with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. She woke before dawn to review documents, stayed up past midnight, refining presentations, pushed her body through physical therapy sessions that left her trembling and exhausted. Nathan watched her drive herself towards some invisible finish line and recognized the pattern immediately. He had seen it in himself after Sarah died, the desperate need to fill every moment with activity, so there was no space left for grief to creep in. One morning, he found her in the gym at 5:30, attempting exercises that her therapist had not yet cleared her for. Her face was pale with effort, sweat soaking through her shirt, her arms shaking as she tried to support her weight on the parallel bars. She was going to hurt herself. The words came out sharper than Nathan intended. Victoria did not stop. She needed to be stronger, she said through gritted teeth. The initiative launch was in 6 weeks. She could not lead an adaptive sports program from a wheelchair if she could not even demonstrate basic mobility. Nathan moved closer, positioning himself to catch her if she fell. The program was not about her mobility, he reminded her. It was about creating opportunities for others. She did not have to prove anything to anyone. Her arms gave out and she collapsed back into the wheelchair with a sound of pure frustration. Everyone kept telling her that she snapped, that she did not have to prove herself. But they were not the ones sitting in this chair. They were not the ones who saw the doubt in people's eyes every time she entered a room. Nathan crouched beside her, waiting until she met his gaze. The doubt in other people's eyes was their problem, he said quietly, not hers. She had already proven herself to the board. She had saved the foundation. Now she needed to stop trying to earn something she had already won. Victoria's anger deflated as quickly as it had risen. She was scared, she admitted, terrified that she would fail, that the initiative would collapse, that everyone who had doubted her would be proven right. Fear was normal, Nathan told her. Fear meant she cared about the outcome. But fear should inform decisions, not make them. Right now, she was making decisions from a place of panic rather than purpose. They sat in silence for a moment, the early morning light filtering through the gym windows. Finally, Victoria asked how he did it, how he stayed so calm when everything felt like it was falling apart. Practice, Nathan replied, years of practice, and the knowledge that panic never actually solved anything. It just made you tired. Victoria managed a weak smile. She was already tired. Then she should rest, Nathan suggested. The spreadsheets would still be there tomorrow. Her body needed recovery time, not punishment. For once, Victoria did not argue. She let Nathan help her back to her bedroom, let him adjust the pillows and bring her water, and close the blinds against the rising sun. She was asleep before he reached the door. The confrontation marked a turning point. Victoria began to pace herself to recognize that recovery was not a race but a journey. She still worked hard, still pushed her limits, but with more awareness of where those limits actually were. Nathan watched the change with quiet satisfaction, knowing that this kind of self-knowledge could not be taught. It had to be discovered. Lily's presence at the mansion became more frequent as spring turned towards summer. School let out for various holidays and professional development days, and Nathan's backup childcare arrangements proved unreliable. Victoria, who had once claimed to dislike children, began requesting Lily's company. The mansion is too quiet without her, she would say, as if this were a purely practical consideration and not an admission of affection. Lily accepted Victoria's attention with the easy grace of a child who had never learned to be suspicious of kindness. She set up art stations in various rooms, leaving trails of glitter and crayon shavings that Angela cleaned up with only minimal complaint. Her drawings evolved from simple knights and dragons to elaborate narratives involving entire kingdoms, each one featuring characters who overcame obstacles through courage and friendship. One afternoon, Nathan found Victoria and Lily in the sunroom, heads bent together over a large sheet of paper. They were collaborating on a mural, Lily directing, and Victoria contributing surprisingly skilled sketches of mountain landscapes. Victoria looked up as he entered, and there was something in her expression that he had never seen before. A softness, a contentment that seemed to have caught her by surprise. Lily was teaching her about dragons, Victoria explained. Apparently, there were different types: fire dragons and ice dragons and storm dragons. Each one had different strengths and different weaknesses, Lily added importantly. That is what makes them interesting. If they were perfect, there would be no story. Nathan watched his daughter dispense wisdom with the confidence of a tenured professor and felt his heart swell with pride. She had inherited Sarah's gift for finding meaning in everything, for transforming ordinary moments into lessons worth remembering. The mural grew over the following days, sprawling across an entire wall of the sunroom. Victoria ordered professional art supplies, claiming it was necessary for the project's completion. But fooling no one, Lily responded by incorporating increasingly ambitious elements: a castle in the clouds, an underwater kingdom, a mountain range that bore a suspicious resemblance to the Sierra Nevada. At the center of it all stood the knight, still in her wheelchair, now surrounded by an army of friends and allies. Dragons and squirrels and unicorns and creatures that defied classification. The knight was not alone anymore. She had found her people. Victoria stared at the finished mural for a long time after Lily had gone home for the evening. Nathan found her there motionless in her wheelchair, her face wet with tears. She did not turn when he entered. Lily saw things, she said quietly, things that adults had forgotten how to see. What kinds of things, Nathan asked. Possibility. Victoria's voice cracked on the word. She looked at that knight and saw a hero. She looked at me and saw someone worth believing in. How does a 7-year-old have more faith than I do? Nathan moved to stand beside her. Children had not learned to be cynical. Yet he said, they had not been taught that hope was foolish or that dreams were impractical. They looked at the world and saw what it could be, not just what it was. Victoria reached out and touched the painted knight, her fingers tracing the wheelchair's wheels. She used to be like that, she said, before the accident, before Derek, before she learned that people left when things got hard. The mention of Derek's name was unexpected. Victoria rarely spoke of her ex-boyfriend, and when she did, it was usually with bitter dismissiveness. But tonight there was something different in her voice, something raw. Nathan waited, sensing that she needed to talk. The story emerged slowly, painfully, like pulling splinters from beneath the skin. Derek Morrison had been her climbing partner before he was her lover. They had met on a training expedition in Colorado, had bonded over shared adrenaline and mountain sunsets. He was charming and adventurous, and exactly the kind of man Victoria had always imagined herself with. The accident changed everything. Derek had been supportive at first, visiting the hospital every day, holding her hand through the worst of it. But as the weeks turned into months, and it became clear that Victoria would not make a miraculous recovery, his visits grew shorter and less frequent. The adventurous man who had once scaled cliff faces beside her began to look at her wheelchair with something like revulsion. He left 14 months after the accident, Victoria continued. Said he had not signed up for this. Said he needed someone who could keep up with him. Said he hoped she understood. She had understood, all right. She had understood that love was conditional. That people stayed only as long as you were useful, entertaining, able-bodied. That the moment you became a burden, they started looking for the exit. Nathan listened without interrupting, letting her expel the poison that had been festering for years. When she finally fell silent, he spoke carefully. Derek's leaving said everything about Derek and nothing about her, he said. Some people did not have the capacity for commitment. They loved the idea of a person, not the person themselves. When the idea shattered, they had nothing left to hold on to. Victoria turned to face him, and her eyes held a vulnerability that she rarely allowed anyone to see. How did he know the difference, she asked, between someone who loved the idea and someone who loved the person? Nathan thought about Sarah, about the way she had looked at him, even in her final days. Like he was the most important thing in her world. Like his presence alone was enough. The ones who love you will stay, he said. Not because it is easy, but because they cannot imagine leaving. They will see you at your worst and choose you anyway. Not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire to be part of your life. Had Sarah been like that? Victoria asked. Sarah had been exactly like that. Nathan's voice softened with memory. She had seen him at his worst many times. Angry, depressed, struggling. She never once made him feel like a burden. She made him feel like he was worth fighting for. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that Nathan had not expected. She was starting to understand what that felt like. Before he could respond, Victoria changed the subject, asking about plans for the initiative launch. The moment passed, but its significance lingered in the air between them, a door that had cracked open and might not close again. The Adaptive Recreation Initiative launch was scheduled for mid-June, a carefully orchestrated event designed to attract media attention and potential donors. Victoria had chosen a venue in Lake Tahoe, a resort that specialized in accessible outdoor experiences. The symbolism was intentional. Mountains had been the site of her greatest triumph and her most devastating loss. Now they would become the backdrop for her reinvention. Preparations consumed the weeks leading up to the event. Nathan coordinated logistics while Victoria handled publicity and donor relations. They worked side by side in her father's study, the room that had once been a mausoleum, now transformed into a war room. Maps and charts covered the walls. Phone calls blurred into video conferences, blurred into strategy sessions that stretched deep into the night. 3 days before the launch, a letter arrived that changed everything. Nathan was in the kitchen when Angela brought it in, her face carefully neutral, in a way that suggested she knew something was wrong. The envelope was cream-colored and expensive, addressed to Victoria in handwriting that Nathan did not recognize. He brought it to the study where Victoria was reviewing final preparations. She took one look at the envelope and went pale. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Nathan watched her read, watched the color drain further from her face, watched her jaw tighten with an emotion he could not quite identify. Derek was getting married. The words emerged flat and hollow. He sent an invitation. Apparently, he wanted her to know. She thrust the invitation toward Nathan, and he scanned the elegant calligraphy. Derek Morrison and Samantha Chen requested the honor of her presence at their wedding. The ceremony would take place in Aspen at a resort that Victoria had probably climbed past a dozen times during her competition days. It was a cruel gesture, whether intentional or not. An invitation to watch her ex-boyfriend marry someone else, someone who could presumably keep up with him, someone whose body had not betrayed her on a mountainside. Victoria's composure cracked. She grabbed the nearest object, a paperweight shaped like a mountain peak, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, and the sound seemed to release something in her, a torrent of rage that had been building for years. She screamed at the unfairness of it, at Derek for moving on while she remained stuck, at her own body for failing her, at the universe for dealing her this hand and then rubbing salt in the wound with a wedding invitation printed on cardstock that probably cost more than Nathan's weekly groceries. Nathan let her rage. He did not try to calm her down or offer platitudes. He simply stood witness, a steady presence in the storm of her grief. When the fury finally exhausted itself, Victoria slumped in her wheelchair, tears streaming down her face. She looked broken in a way she had not allowed herself to look since Nathan first arrived. Why did it still hurt? She asked. She did not love Derek anymore. She did not even like him. But the invitation felt like proof that she was right to be afraid, that she was fundamentally unlovable, that everyone would eventually leave. Nathan crouched beside her, taking her hands in his. The invitation was not proof of anything he said. It was just paper. Derek's choices were about Derek, not about her. He had found someone else, which meant he was not the right person for her in the first place. The right person would not have left. Victoria met his eyes, and the question hung unspoken between them. Who was the right person? Was there even such a thing for someone like her? The silence stretched, charged with something neither of them was ready to name. Then Victoria pulled her hands away, wiped her face, and announced that she needed to focus on the launch. She could not afford to fall apart now. Not when everything she had worked for was finally coming together. Nathan recognized the deflection for what it was and chose not to push. Some conversations needed to happen in their own time. The wedding invitation disappeared into a desk drawer, but its presence lingered like a ghost. Victoria threw herself back into work with renewed intensity, channeling her pain into productivity. Nathan watched and worried and waited for the next crack in her armor. It came sooner than he expected. The night before they were scheduled to leave for Lake Tahoe, Victoria called Nathan into her father's study. She was sitting in front of an open drawer, a leather-bound journal in her hands. She had found something, she said, something she had not known existed. Nathan moved closer and saw that the journal was filled with handwriting he recognized from the photographs around the room. James Hartwell's script, precise and slanted, and full of the energy that seemed to characterize everything about the man. Victoria turned to a specific page, her hands shaking slightly. This was his climbing journal, she explained. He kept records of every expedition, every summit, every failure. She had thought she knew all of it, but there was an entry she had never seen. She began to read aloud, her voice breaking on the words. James Hartwell had written about his daughter's Denali summit, the one she completed after his death. He had known he would not live to see it. His heart condition had been diagnosed months before, and he had kept it secret, not wanting to burden Victoria or discourage her training. He wrote about watching her prepare, about the pride that swelled in his chest every time she pushed past her limits. But the most devastating part came at the end. James had written a message directly to Victoria, knowing that someday she might find this journal. The words were simple and devastating. He told her that she was the bravest person he had ever known. Not because she climbed mountains, but because she never stopped trying. He told her that whatever happened in her life, whatever failures or setbacks she faced, she should remember that courage was not about never falling. It was about getting up every time you did. Victoria could not continue reading. The tears came too fast, the sobs too violent. Nathan took the journal from her trembling hands and finished reading aloud. James Hartwell's final words to his daughter were these: "You are enough exactly as you are. Never let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." The study was silent except for Victoria's weeping. Nathan set down the journal and knelt beside her wheelchair, pulling her into an embrace that she did not resist. She cried against his shoulder, years of grief and anger and self-doubt pouring out of her in waves. He held her until the storm passed, until her breathing steadied and her body stopped shaking. When she finally pulled back, her face was swollen and her eyes were red, but something had shifted in her expression. Something had broken open that needed breaking. She had spent 2 years believing she was worthless, she whispered, believing that her father would be ashamed of what she had become. But he had always known who she really was. Nathan brushed a strand of hair from her face, a gesture so intimate that it surprised them both. Her father had seen what Nathan saw, he said. A woman of extraordinary strength and courage. Someone worth believing in. Victoria met his eyes, and for a moment the air between them crackled with unspoken possibility. Then she looked away, retreating behind the wall she knew so well. They should get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow was a big day. Nathan accepted the dismissal, understanding that she needed time to process what had just happened. He said goodnight and left the study, but he paused at the door and looked back. Victoria was still holding the journal, her father's words pressed against her heart like a talisman. She looked smaller than usual, younger, stripped of the armor she wore so constantly. She looked, Nathan realized, like someone who was finally beginning to heal. He closed the door softly and went home to his daughter, carrying with him the weight of everything that had passed between them and everything that remained unsaid. The drive to Lake Tahoe took 4 hours, and Nathan spent most of it stealing glances at Victoria in the passenger seat. She was quieter than usual, contemplative, her eyes fixed on the mountains rising around them. The journal sat in her lap, a physical reminder of her father's faith in her. Lily chattered from the bunk seat, excited about the trip and the lake and the promise of adventures to come. Her enthusiasm was infectious, cutting through the heavy atmosphere and reminding them both why they were doing this in the first place. The resort was everything Victoria had hoped for. Accessible trails wound through pine forests. Adaptive equipment lined the boathouse, ready to take wheelchair users out onto the water. A climbing wall had been modified to accommodate a range of abilities, and trained staff stood ready to help guests experience the mountain in ways they had never thought possible. Victoria toured the facilities with growing excitement, her earlier melancholy giving way to the joy of seeing her vision realize. This was what her father had dreamed of, she said. This was the legacy she wanted to build. Nathan watched her come alive, watched the spark return to her eyes, and felt something shift in his own heart. He had started this job looking for a paycheck. He had stayed because he saw something worth saving. Now he was realizing that somewhere along the way his motivations had changed entirely. He was not staying for the money anymore. He was not even staying because Victoria needed him. He was staying because he could not imagine being anywhere else. The launch event exceeded all expectations. Donors wrote checks. Media coverage was overwhelmingly positive. Participants in the demonstration programs spoke movingly about what the initiative meant to them. Victoria delivered her keynote address with passion and conviction, and when she finished, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 3 minutes. Afterward, Nathan found her on a balcony overlooking the lake, the sunset painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. She was crying again, but these were different tears. These were the tears of someone who had finally arrived at a destination they had almost stopped believing in. She had done it, she said. She had actually done it. Nathan stood beside her close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She had done it, he agreed, and this was just the beginning. Victoria turned to face him, and the fading sunlight caught her features in a way that made his breath catch. She was beautiful, he realized, not despite the wheelchair or the scars or the pain she carried, but including all of it. She was beautiful because she was real, because she had been broken and had chosen to rebuild herself piece by piece. Thank you, she said, for everything. He did not know who moved first. Maybe it was her, or maybe it was him, or maybe they both moved at the same moment, drawn together by a gravity that had been building for months. But suddenly her lips were on his, and he was kissing her back, and the world narrowed to the single point of contact between two people who had been alone for far too long. The kiss lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. When they pulled apart, Victoria's eyes were wide with surprise and something that looked like fear. She did not know what this meant, she said. She did not know if she was ready for what this might become. Nathan took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. They did not have to know, he told her. They did not have to have all the answers right now. They just had to be willing to find out together. Victoria looked at their joined hands at the man who had refused to give up on her at the future that suddenly seemed full of possibility instead of pain. Okay, she said finally, together. Below them, the lake reflected the last light of the sun, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called out across the water. The mountains stood silent and eternal witnesses to countless stories of struggle and triumph. This was just one more. But for Nathan and Victoria, it was the only one that mattered. The drive back to San Francisco felt different from the journey out. The mountains that had loomed so large in the rear-view mirror seemed smaller now, less threatening, as if Victoria's triumph had somehow diminished their power over her. Lily slept in the backseat exhausted from 2 days of adventure and new experiences, her head lolling against the window with the boneless grace of childhood. Nathan kept his eyes on the road, but his awareness remained fixed on the woman beside him, on the kiss that still burned on his lips, on the uncertain territory they had entered together. Victoria broke the silence first. She needed to tell him something, she said, and her voice carried the weight of a decision carefully made. The kiss had not been a mistake. She did not regret it, but she was terrified of what came next. Nathan glanced at her, then back at the road. He understood terror, he replied. He had been living with it for 4 years. The trick was not to let it make your choices for you. She had been letting fear make her choices for 2 years, Victoria admitted. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of hoping for something and watching it slip away. But somewhere along the way, she had stopped being afraid of him, of them. That scared her more than anything else. The highway stretched before them, straight and endless, carrying them toward a future neither could fully imagine. Nathan reached across the console and took her hand, a simple gesture that spoke louder than any words. They did not have to figure everything out today, he said. They just had to keep moving forward. 1 mile at a time, Victoria's fingers tightened around his. 1 mile at a time, she repeated. She could do that. The weeks following the Lake Tahoe launch brought a new rhythm to their lives. The Adaptive Recreation Initiative demanded constant attention, and Victoria threw herself into the work with characteristic intensity. But something had shifted in the quality of that intensity. She no longer worked as if she were running from something. Now she worked as if she were running toward it. Nathan watched the transformation with quiet wonder. The woman who had once hurled medication bottles at his head now consulted him on major decisions. The employer who had tested his patience with impossible demands now valued his opinion as an equal partner. The walls she had built so carefully were coming down brick by brick, revealing the person she had always been beneath the armor. Their relationship evolved in ways that surprised them both. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic moments of commitment. Instead, there was the gradual accumulation of small intimacies. Coffee shared in the early morning before Lily woke, hands touching across conference tables during endless meetings, looks exchanged that communicated entire conversations without a single word. Lily, with the perceptiveness of children, noticed the change before anyone else. She began referring to Victoria as part of their family, including her in stories about future holidays and vacations. When Nathan gently suggested that they should not make assumptions, Lily fixed him with a look of pure 7-year-old exasperation. Victoria made them happy, she said. They made Victoria happy. That was what family meant. Why did adults have to make everything so complicated? Nathan had no good answer for that. Perhaps because adults had learned to fear the things that children still embraced without question. Perhaps because experience had taught them that happiness was fragile, that love could be lost, that the people you counted on might not always be there. But Lily was right. Victoria did make them happy, and they made her happy. Whatever complications lay ahead, that fundamental truth remained unchanged. Margaret Hartwell visited the mansion on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced as always. Nathan was in the garden with Lily when the sleek black car pulled into the driveway, and he felt his stomach tighten with familiar apprehension. Victoria's mother had made no secret of her suspicions about his motives, and the developing relationship between him and her daughter would only confirm her worst fears. But the Margaret who emerged from the car seemed different from previous visits. Her posture was less rigid, her expression less guarded. She paused when she saw Nathan, and something flickered across her face that might have been acknowledgement. She was looking for Victoria, she said. They had matters to discuss. Nathan directed her inside and continued his game with Lily, but his mind remained fixed on what was happening in the house. The relationship between Victoria and her mother had always been complicated, layered with old wounds and unspoken resentments. He hoped this visit would not undo the progress Victoria had made. An hour passed before Victoria wheeled onto the garden terrace, her expression unreadable. Margaret followed close behind, and the two women stood in silence for a moment, watching Lily chase butterflies through the flower beds. Her mother wanted to apologize, Victoria said finally, for doubting her, for doubting Nathan, for spending 2 years pushing her toward recovery while refusing to believe she could actually achieve it. Nathan looked at Margaret, who met his gaze with surprising directness. She had been wrong about him, she admitted. She had assumed the worst because assuming the worst was easier than hoping for the best. It was a defense mechanism she had learned from her own mother and from her husband and from a lifetime of disappointments that had taught her to guard against vulnerability. But watching Victoria these past months had shown her something she had forgotten. Her daughter was strong, stronger than Margaret had given her credit for. And the people she chose to surround herself with were not predators circling weakness. They were allies who saw her strength and wanted to help her use it. The apology hung in the air, raw and uncomfortable, and more honest than anything Margaret had said in years. Victoria's eyes were wet, but she did not look away from her mother. She had waited a long time to hear those words, Victoria said. Part of her had stopped believing they would ever come. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. She knew she replied. She knew she had failed her daughter in ways that could not be easily forgiven. But she wanted to try. She wanted to be part of whatever Victoria was building, not as a critic or a skeptic, but as a supporter. As a mother, the reconciliation was not complete. Too many years of distance and disappointment could not be erased by a single conversation. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had separated mother and daughter for so long. Victoria reached out and took Margaret's hand, and something passed between them that transcended words. Lily, oblivious to the emotional significance of the moment, came running up with a butterfly perched on her finger. She wanted to show everyone what she had found. The butterfly's wings were orange and black, she announced, which meant it was a monarch. She had learned about them in school. Margaret looked at the child with an expression Nathan had never seen on her face before. Something soft, something almost tender. She was a very smart girl, Margaret said. She must take after her father. Nathan felt his heart skip. It was a small comment easily overlooked, but its implications were enormous. Margaret Hartwell had just acknowledged him as worthy of respect, had just suggested that his daughter might inherit positive qualities from him, had just taken a step toward accepting him as part of Victoria's life. The afternoon stretched into evening, and Margaret stayed for dinner. The conversation was stilted, at times awkward at others, but it was happening. 3 generations of women sat around the same table learning to see each other through new eyes. Nathan watched from the periphery, content to witness rather than participate, grateful for the healing that was finally beginning to take place. After Margaret left, Victoria found Nathan in the kitchen washing dishes while Lily drew at the table. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder in a gesture of comfortable intimacy. Her mother had asked about him, she said, about his intentions, about where he saw their relationship going. Nathan's hands stilled in the soapy water. What had she told her? The truth, Victoria replied, that she did not know exactly where they were going, that she was still learning to trust, still learning to hope, but that she wanted to find out. With him. Nathan turned to face her suds dripping from his fingers. That was enough for now, he said. They would figure out the rest together. Lily looked up from her, drawing her face bright with interest. Were they talking about getting married? Because if they were, she had some ideas about the flower arrangements. She wanted sunflowers and a dragon. Could they have a dragon at the wedding? Nathan and Victoria exchanged looks, caught between amusement and embarrassment. They were not talking about getting married, Nathan said carefully. They were just talking. But they might talk about it later, Lily pressed. Right? Because that was how it worked in stories. First people fell in love, and then they got married, and then they lived happily ever after. Victoria laughed, a sound that still caught Nathan off guard with its warmth. Life was not always like stories, she told Lily. Sometimes it was messier and more complicated. But the happily ever after part, that was worth working toward. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. Okay, she decided, but she still wanted sunflowers. Summer faded into autumn, and the Adaptive Recreation Initiative grew beyond anyone's expectations. The Lake Tahoe program expanded to include winter sports with skiing and snowboarding adaptations that drew participants from across the country. A second location opened in Colorado, followed by a third in Vermont. The Hartwell Foundation, once on the brink of dissolution, now stood at the forefront of a movement that was changing lives. Victoria traveled constantly, speaking at conferences, meeting with donors, advocating for accessibility in outdoor recreation. Nathan accompanied her when he could, managing logistics and providing support, but increasingly Victoria needed less support. Her confidence had grown along with her physical strength. She still used a wheelchair for long distances, but she could now walk short stretches with just a cane, her steps slow but steady. The progress was not linear. There were setbacks, days when her body refused to cooperate, when the old despair threatened to resurface. But Victoria had learned to weather those storms without letting them sink her. She had learned that bad days did not erase good ones, that temporary failure did not mean permanent defeat. One evening in late October, Nathan found Victoria in her father's study, surrounded by photographs and documents. She was compiling a history of the foundation. She explained, tracing its evolution from her father's modest beginnings to its current prominence. She wanted to create a permanent record, something that future generations could look to for inspiration. She had discovered something in the archives, she continued. Something that changed how she understood her father's vision. The document was a letter dated 6 months before James Hartwell's death. He had written it to the Foundation's board, outlining his hopes for the organization's future. The letter spoke of expansion, of innovation, of reaching people who had been overlooked by traditional recreation programs. It spoke of his daughter, of his confidence in her ability to lead, of his belief that she would carry his vision further than he ever could. But the part that struck Victoria most deeply was a single paragraph near the end. James had written about failure, about the expeditions that had not reached their summits, about the programs that had not achieved their goals. Failure was not the enemy, he wrote. Fear of failure was the enemy. The moment we stop trying because we might not succeed is the moment we truly lose. Victoria had read that paragraph a dozen times, she said. Each time she heard her father's voice more clearly. He had been preparing her for this all along. Not for success, but for the courage to keep trying regardless of outcome. Nathan sat beside her, looking at the letter, at the confident handwriting of a man who had known he was dying and had chosen to use his remaining time building something that would outlast him. Her father would be proud, Nathan said, of the foundation, of the initiative, of her. Victoria nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. She knew, she whispered. For the first time in 2 years, she actually knew. The holidays approached, bringing with them a flurry of activity and decisions. Victoria invited Nathan and Lily to spend Christmas at the mansion, and after much deliberation, Nathan accepted. It felt like a significant step, a declaration of sorts, a public acknowledgement that they were more than employer and employee, more than friends, more than whatever careful label they had been hiding behind. Margaret joined them on Christmas Eve, bearing gifts in a demeanor that was noticeably warmer than her previous visits. She had brought a present for Lily, a professional art set with paints and brushes and canvases of various sizes. The gesture was thoughtful in a way that surprised Nathan, suggesting that Margaret had paid attention to his daughter's interests, had cared enough to find something meaningful. Lily's excitement was overwhelming. She hugged Margaret with the uninhibited affection of childhood, and something in the older woman's expression cracked open. She looked at Victoria, at Nathan, at the child who had somehow become part of their complicated family, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. This was what she had wanted for her daughter, she said quietly. Not the foundation, not the programs, not the public recognition. This, a home, people who loved her, a reason to keep going. Victoria reached for her mother's hand. She had found it, she replied. Finally. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp California winter that made the world feel fresh and full of possibility. Lily woke before anyone else, bouncing on Nathan's bed until he agreed to get up, then racing to the tree to inspect the presents that had appeared overnight. Victoria was already there, sitting in her wheelchair with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink. She looked peaceful in a way that Nathan had never seen before, as if some final piece had clicked into place during the night. Lily distributed presents with the efficiency of a postal worker, sorting piles and announcing recipients with barely contained excitement. There were practical gifts and frivolous ones, heartfelt offerings and silly jokes. But the gift that mattered most came last. Victoria handed Nathan a small box, her expression nervous in a way that was endearingly out of character. He opened it to find a key, old-fashioned and ornate, attached to a ribbon. It was the key to the mansion, Victoria explained. She was not proposing, she added quickly, seeing his expression. She was not asking him to move in tomorrow. She was simply giving him access, whenever he wanted it, for whatever reason. The door would always be open. Nathan understood what she was really saying. She was offering him permanence, a place in her life that was not contingent on employment or circumstance. A home. Lily peered at the key with interest. Did this mean they could come over whenever they wanted? Even for breakfast, because she really liked the pancakes that Angela made. Victoria laughed, the sound mingling with the morning light. Yes, she confirmed, even for breakfast. Nathan looked at the key in his hand, at the woman who had given it to him, at his daughter, already planning future meals. A year ago, he had walked into this mansion desperate for a paycheck. Now he was being offered something he had stopped believing he would ever find again. A family, a future, a home. Thank you, he said, and the words felt inadequate for everything they contained. Victoria smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed her entire face. Thank you for staying, she replied. For believing in me when I could not believe in myself. Lily inserted herself between them, wrapping an arm around each. This was the best Christmas ever, she announced. But next year she still wanted sunflowers. Just in case. The new year brought new challenges and new opportunities. The Foundation's winter programs launched to overwhelming demand, and Victoria found herself managing a staff that had tripled in size. Nathan took on an official role as Director of Operations, a position that formalized what had already become reality. They worked side by side, building something that neither could have built alone. Spring arrived with the kind of sudden beauty that California did so well, hillsides erupting in wildflowers, and air carrying the promise of warmth. Victoria's physical therapy had reached a new milestone. She could now walk nearly 100 feet with her cane, slowly but independently. Her doctor spoke cautiously about continued improvement, about the possibility that she might eventually regain more function than anyone had initially predicted. But Victoria had stopped measuring her worth by what her body could or could not do. She had learned that ability was not the same as value, that contribution did not require physical perfection, that the most important journeys were not always taken on foot. On a warm evening in late April, Victoria asked Nathan to join her in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air smelled of jasmine and possibility. She had been thinking, she said, about the future, about what she wanted her life to look like in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. Nathan waited, sensing that something significant was coming. She wanted him in that future, Victoria continued, him and Lily, not as employees or friends or whatever inadequate term they had been using, as family, real family, the kind that showed up for each other, that weathered storms together, that chose each other, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She was not good at this, she admitted, at vulnerability, at asking for things, at letting people see what she really wanted. But she was learning, and what she really wanted was him. Nathan looked at this woman who had fought so hard, who had rebuilt herself from broken pieces, who had found the courage to hope again after years of despair. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he had made to stay open to love, to teach Lily that happiness was worth pursuing. He thought about everything that had led him to this moment, every twist of fate and choice and circumstance. He wanted that too, he said, all of it. The family, the future, the 50 years. Whatever came next, he wanted to face it with her. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. So it was decided, she said. They were doing this. They were doing this, Nathan confirmed. Together. The wedding took place on a Saturday in June, exactly 1 year after the Lake Tahoe launch. It was small and simple, held in the mansion's garden, with only close friends and family in attendance. Lily served as flower girl, scattering sunflower petals down the aisle, with an enthusiasm that sent several guests diving for cover. Victoria walked to the altar on her own 2 feet, using her cane, her steps slow but steady. She had practiced for weeks, determined to make this journey without assistance. It took her nearly 5 minutes to cover the distance, and not a single person minded the wait. Nathan watched her approach with tears streaming down his face. She was beautiful in a simple white dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, her expression radiant with joy. This was not the angry, bitter woman he had met a year and a half ago. This was someone transformed, someone who had found her way back to herself. The vows they exchanged were personal and unrehearsed. Victoria spoke of walls and the courage to tear them down. Nathan spoke of showing up, of staying, of choosing each other every day. Lily interrupted twice to remind everyone about the sunflowers which she felt were not receiving adequate appreciation. Margaret sat in the front row crying openly, all pretense of composure abandoned. Angela stood nearby, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief she had prepared for this exact purpose. The small gathering radiated warmth and acceptance, a testament to the family that Victoria and Nathan had built together. When the officiant pronounced them married, Lily cheered so loudly that birds took flight from nearby trees. She launched herself at both of them, creating a group embrace that was awkward and perfect and exactly right. "Can I call her Mom now?" Lily asked, her voice muffled against Victoria's dress. "I have been waiting forever." Victoria pulled back to look at her, this child who had drawn knights in wheelchairs and believed in dragons and loved without reservation or fear. "Yes," Victoria said, and her voice broke on the word. "You can call me Mom." Lily's face lit up with pure joy. Finally, she declared, "This is officially the best day ever." The reception lasted well into the evening, guests lingering over good food and better company, reluctant to let the celebration end. Nathan danced with his daughter, then with his wife, marveling at how naturally the word fit. His wife, Victoria, the woman who had changed everything. Later, when the guests had gone and Lily had fallen asleep on a garden bench, Nathan and Victoria sat together on the terrace, looking out at the city lights below. 1 year ago, she had been alone in this house, counting down the days until her next assistant quit. Now she had a husband, a daughter, a purpose that got her out of bed each morning. The transformation seemed impossible, like something out of the stories Lily loved so much. It was not impossible, Nathan reminded her. It was just hard. There was a difference with them. Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder. "He always said the right thing," she murmured. "How did he do that?" "Practice," he replied. And the knowledge that she was worth saying the right thing to. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of San Francisco twinkle like earthbound stars. Somewhere in the house, their daughter slept peacefully, dreaming of dragons and adventures. Somewhere in the city, thousands of lives continued their individual journeys, each one a story of struggle and hope, and the endless human capacity for change. This was not the end of their story. Marriage was not a destination, but a beginning, the start of a new chapter in a book that would continue to be written for years to come. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome, moments of doubt and difficulty, but they would face them together, the three of them, this unlikely family that had been built from broken pieces and stubborn hope. The Adaptive Recreation Initiative continued to grow in the months following the wedding. New programs launched across the country, each one carrying the Hartwell name and the vision that James had planted and Victoria had nurtured into bloom. Participants came from every background, every ability level, every walk of life. They climbed mountains in adaptive gear, kayaked rivers in specialized boats, skied slopes that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. Victoria traveled to each new location, speaking to participants and staff, sharing her story and listening to theirs. She no longer saw her wheelchair as a limitation. She saw it as a credential proof that she understood the challenges her participants faced, evidence that obstacles could be overcome. Nathan managed operations from San Francisco, keeping the complex machinery of the foundation running smoothly. Lily started second grade and immediately began evangelizing about adaptive sports to her classmates, several of whom had family members with disabilities. Her drawings now featured elaborate scenes of people in wheelchairs scaling mountains, kayaking rapids, soaring through the air on adaptive ski equipment. The 1-year anniversary of the initiative's launch approached, and Victoria planned a celebration that would bring together participants, donors, and advocates from across the country. The event would be held at Lake Tahoe, where it had all begun, a full-circle moment that felt appropriate for everything they had accomplished. Nathan watched the preparations with a mixture of pride and wonder. The woman who had once hidden from the world was now leading a movement. The woman who had believed herself worthless was now inspiring thousands. The woman who had pushed everyone away was now surrounded by people who loved her. On the morning of the anniversary event, Victoria woke early and made her way to the window. The lake stretched before her, calm and blue and full of possibility. In a few hours, this space would be filled with people whose lives had been changed by the work she and her team had done. People who had discovered that their disabilities did not define them. People who had found community and purpose and joy in places they never expected to find it. Nathan joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She was nervous, she admitted. Even after everything, the prospect of standing before a crowd still made her heart race. Nervous was normal, Nathan reminded her. It meant she cared about what she was doing. The day she stopped feeling nervous was the day she should start worrying. Victoria laughed, leaning back against him. He always knew what to say. The event exceeded all expectations. Participants shared stories of transformation, of mountains climbed and rivers crossed and fears conquered. Donors pledged support for future expansion. Media coverage was overwhelmingly positive, spreading the foundation's message to audiences around the world. Victoria delivered the keynote address with passion and conviction. She spoke of her father's vision, of her own journey from despair to hope, of the countless individuals who had helped her along the way. She spoke of Nathan, who had refused to give up on her, of Lily, who had shown her what courage really looked like, of everyone in the audience who had chosen to keep trying, keep fighting, keep believing that better was possible. Mountains do not care who you are, she said, echoing her father's words. They only ask one question. Do you have the courage to keep going? Today, looking at all of you, I know the answer. Yes. Yes, we do. The applause was thunderous, lasting several minutes. Victoria stood at the podium, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by the community she had helped build. This was her father's legacy fully realized. This was her own legacy just beginning. Afterward, Nathan found her on the same balcony where they had shared their first kiss a year ago. She was looking at the mountains, her expression peaceful. He was proud of her, he said. More proud than he knew how to express. Victoria turned to face him. She could not have done any of it without him, she replied. He had given her the courage to trace him out. Nathan shook his head. He had not given her anything. He had simply stayed long enough for her to find what was already there. They stood together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors that seemed too beautiful to be real. Their daughter was somewhere below, probably causing cheerful chaos among the other children. Their future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise. Victoria reached out and took Nathan's hand, threading her fingers through his the way she had done 100 times before. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That was the only certainty they needed. The mountains stood silent and eternal witnesses to another chapter in the endless human story of struggle and redemption. They had seen countless climbers come and go, some reaching the summit, others falling short. But the mountains did not judge success by summits reached. They judged it by the courage to attempt the climb. Victoria Hartwell had fallen. She had lain broken at the base of a mountain, convinced that her life was over. But she had gotten back up. She had found handholds where none seemed to exist. She had climbed slowly and painfully toward a peak she could not even see. And now she stood at a summit of her own making, looking out at a vista more beautiful than any she had imagined. Not because she had regained the use of her legs, though that too had exceeded expectations, because she had regained herself, her purpose, her hope, her belief that life was worth living even when living was hard. That was the lesson her father had tried to teach her. That was the truth Nathan had helped her remember. That was the gift Lily had given her, wrapped in crayon drawings and unconditional love. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to move forward anyway, to take one more step, to try one more time, to believe that the climb was worth making even when you could not see the summit. The mansion on the hillside was no longer silent. It rang with laughter and conversation and the patter of small feet running down hallways. It held a family that had found each other against all odds, 3 broken people who had chosen to heal together. And in the garden, a mural stretched across one wall, faded by sun and rain, but still visible. A knight in a wheelchair, surrounded by dragons and friends, scaling a mountain that reached toward the sky. A reminder that heroes came in all forms, that limitations were not the same as endings, that the greatest adventures were not about where you went, but who you became along the way. This was their story. It was not finished. It would never be finished, not as long as there were mountains to climb and dreams to chase and love to share. But for now, for this moment, it was exactly right. The sun set behind the Sierra Nevada, and somewhere in the distance, a bird sang its evening song. Nathan and Victoria stood together, hands clasped, hearts full, facing whatever came next. Together. always together.